6th or 7th Clean Water Conference at the university. And of course, it's sponsored by the Water Resources,
Rhode Island Water Resources.
Rhode Island Water Resources and the LSAMP system. Today's November 10th. This is the agenda. We have 3 distinguished speakers. One comes from Scituate Reservoir, and recently you can see he's became president of the New England Water Works Association. Right after him, we anxiously await the coffee break, and I think they have cookies too. Then someone from DuPont is going to talk about chlorine dioxide and nitrification, and then that's Michael Trottier, PhD student from UR. And then someone's going to talk about industrial water use, Harold Mantius from Ocean Spray, and I'll finish up the program. I'm going to go through the 3 speakers first, and then I won't have to give an introduction. But before I do that, let's see if Leon wants to give a welcome.
Why wouldn't I? Thank you for coming here. This is according to what I'm reading here, the 6th annual Clean Drinking Water Conference. So the Rhode Island Water Resources Center, which is funded by the Department of Interior, the USGS, supports this technology transfer, basically, and we're really happy to do that. And I'd like to particularly thank Professor Nickel for putting this on, because it does take a lot of work to do this. He also runs the summer camp for high school students in a water academy, which is also a very good program that we support, and the Water Resources Center supports. So with that, thank you for coming, and it looks like a great program as always.
Okay, so I'm going to now just give 3 brief bios. And our first speaker is now, as I mentioned, the president of the New England Water Works. It's the region's largest not-for-profit organization of waterworks professionals in the New England area. And he's also the director of water supply for the Providence Water Supply Board. He's been there a long time, and he's responsible for the source of supply and treatment system of the water utility that's in Scituate, at the Scituate Reservoir, the largest supplier of water in Rhode Island. 60% or more of the state gets their water from there, and we're so lucky to have the Scituate Reservoir in Rhode Island. We have relatively clean water in most of the state, relatively clean drinking water. Next is coming Michael Trottier. Is Face in here? Okay, and he's from DuPont. And he did a PhD thesis here on high temperature dielectrics for thin film sensors in 1993. He has his PhD in chemical engineering from here. He's this, and then I was going to fund him, but he's not here. I looked up Michael Trottier on the web, and Michael Trottier has been all these things here. He's governance and education management, commodity accounts. Of course, that's not really him. He works on at Quonset, and he'll be here, or one of our other students that graduated a few years back will be here. I was assured by email. And then there's no cranberry juice today, but this is a byproduct of cranberry growing and cranberry processing. The juice is from cranberry. And here we have he's a senior principal process engineer. And I like to think actually that chemical engineering has produced lots of great process engineers. And now he's a senior one. And he's been working for Ocean Spray since '89. And he has at least 3 patents, maybe more. And he got his BS in chemical engineering in 1970. And just talking to him before he came here, he took 2 or 3 courses with me while he was here at the university. Okay, so we'll now bring up Mr. Carvalone. And we can bring up the slide, I think. There. Okay, hopefully that works. Got my fingers crossed.
Good afternoon. Thank you for asking me to be here this afternoon. I actually went to URI too. I'm old as well. I graduated in '72, so it's been a while. I'm going to give a little bit of a summary of some different aspects of water supply in Rhode Island. I'm going to start out with a little bit of history of the Scituate Reservoir and then go on concerning our water resources program, tell you a little bit about the treatment that goes on at the plant, and then tell you about a project that we started about a year or so ago that's pretty big. Scituate, I need to look at something here, whether it's that wall or whether it's this computer. Can I turn this a little bit here?
Yeah, sure. You can move it over if you want.
Can I move it over?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The Scituate supply actually didn't start when Providence Water started. Providence Water started around 1871. And we actually had a supply in the Patuxent River that was in the area of the city back then. The primary reason for having a public water supply back then wasn't just for drinking water, it was also for fire prevention. That was really the motivator in those days. It wasn't long, however, in those kind of systems, and it wasn't just in Providence, it was in a number of cities and towns throughout the states. They ended up with water quality issues. As I said, there wasn't a lot of treatment going on back then, and the purpose was primarily water fire prevention. So people started getting sick. Diseases starting sprouting out, and so they needed to do something different. So it wasn't too long that they decided to develop a supply in Scituate, Rhode Island. Scituate's kind of it's not a city-type atmosphere, it's a very, very rural-type atmosphere, but it's actually only about 12 miles out of the city. We developed a supply there which includes a 40 billion gallon reservoir with 5 tributary reservoirs feeding into it. In addition to that, there was a very large watershed that was created where that reservoir was. There were actually towns and little villages that were in that area that basically were flooded to create the reservoir there. One of the things philosophically that we've always maintained is that in order to supply good quality drinking water, we were very concerned about the watershed itself. We always felt over the years that the water we treated needed to be good from the beginning. The raw water needed to be as good as the treated water in some respects. And so we were very concerned about protecting our watershed, very concerned about the quality of the water that eventually would end up at the treatment plant and eventually end up in people's taps. So we actually have a pretty active program on our watershed. The forest cover that is most of the watershed is actually acts as a biofilter and creates a situation where we get good quality water flowing in. The watershed in Scituate contributes approximately 100 million gallons of water a day to the main reservoir. So it's constantly turning over. We have basically a five-step program, you might say, that we utilize to protect the watershed. One is we buy land. Over the years, we've bought over 52 parcels of land, amounting to about 2,500 acres. We've spent over $20 million on this land, and this program is active even today. As of now, we have a couple of closings pending at the moment of land that we're purchasing in our watershed. By doing so, we help protect the watershed, we protect further development, any runoff from those developments. It's all part of a program, again, to create a situation where the water quality going into the watershed and into the reservoirs eventually is good quality. One of the other things we do is have a pretty extensive outreach program. We feel it's important. We don't own all the land in the watershed. We probably own about 25 to 30% of the land in the watershed. The rest of that land is susceptible to development. Quite frankly, it's pretty attractive to people to live in Scituate because of the reservoir being there. They end up with an environment that's very nice for them. So we feel it's important to educate them in terms of what it means to live on a watershed, what their responsibilities are in terms of that. So we have outreach to schools, we have outreach to the owners of the homes themselves, the adults, again, to make them aware of that. We also provide a lot of input to the local zoning boards in the towns. The watershed is not only in Situate, it encompasses parts of Foster and Gloucester, and actually some small areas of even Johnston, Rhode Island. So we provide input to those local zoning boards. We provide input on proposed developments and anything else that we feel may be affecting the water quality in the watershed. That includes also input into state regulatory agencies. Agencies like DEM provide regulations concerning stormwater and wetlands, and one of the bigger things right now is water allocation. That's relatively controversial right now in terms of who has a right to what water and how much water is necessary for the brooks and streams that exist in the state. And it will affect water supply, has the potential to really affect water supply greatly down the road. But we provide input to all of those types of regulatory situations. We run pretty extensive sampling on the watershed. We actually take samples from about 40 locations at varying spots within our watershed. Most of those samples are taken on a monthly basis. Again, it's all done so that we have an idea of what's going on in the watershed. We have an idea of something's affecting the quality of the water in that watershed. We also do some specialized sampling that includes sampling for protozoas such as Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Those types of organisms have been responsible for some big disease outbreaks in some areas of the country. Finally, we also manage that whole watershed. We own about 20 acres of land in the watershed. Most of that is forest land. Over the years, we've planted over 7 million trees. The idea is to create a healthy, growing forest that has diversity and, again, produces high-quality water. We maintain all the property in the watershed. We have grounds crews, people that go out and do brush cutting, pruning, thinning of that forest. We have a number of fire lanes that have to be cleared. When you have a storm such as Irene a few weeks ago, a lot of those trees come down, they block those fire lanes. So we have crews that have to go into that watershed and clear that for us. Ultimately, this ends up hopefully with a forest that has strong, straight trees, disease-free. We want them to be diverse in their species and their age classes. We want to be able to cut trees and then have more grow and then have a turnover of that. We want trees that are also resistant to invasive plants and disease and insects and such. So it's all part of what we do. We actually have we put out a contract sometimes more than once a year, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 times a year, where timber companies come and they bid on our trees that have been identified as trees we want to cut down. They in turn sell, or we sell them the rights to cut those trees, and then a lot of those products are used for things like telephone poles and log cabins, firewood. We even have some witch hazel that grows that we're paid to harvest. Someone pays us to harvest the witch hazel at some point. So there's actually some products coming out of the watershed as well. As a byproduct to all that, we have a pretty pristine watershed out there. And so environmentally, we're preserving a lot of rare and endangered species of birds and plants and vegetation that's out in that watershed. I think there's actually been some groups from this school that have come out and identified different butterflies and insects and such that are relatively rare that may be living on our watershed. All that ends up at a treatment plant eventually, and again, that treatment plant came into existence. The construction started in the teens, 1918, 1917, I guess. Ultimately, construction was finished and the plant went online around 1926. That water treatment plant today, as already mentioned, serves over half the population, over 60% of the population of Rhode Island. So Rhode Island really depends quite heavily on that Situate water supply. It's really primarily this part of the state, the southern part of the state, that doesn't get water from Situate. One of the problems because of that is that supply is basically a sole source supply. So if something were to happen to that supply, whether it's a natural disaster or a contamination event or anything of even some kind of terrorism, this state would more or less be put out of business. 60% of the state would be without water. And from my own perspective, when people get all upset that they've been without electricity for a week. I can't imagine what would happen if they were out of water for a week or a month. Basically, the state would stop, the economy in the state would end. And this is a sole source supply. There's no backup to it. I could go on about things like Big River and such, but it'd be way over the time you gave me to speak here, so I won't do that. We ultimately serve 14 municipalities in the state. Providence is obviously the prime metropolitan area, but it is a metropolitan area. It actually includes, part of our retail system includes Providence, Johnston, Cranston, and North Providence. We then, excuse me, we then wholesale water to a number of other communities as well, so it ends up being 14. We average about 70 million gallons of water a day from that treatment plant. It's a conventional treatment process. We incorporate aeration. Ferric sulfate is the coagulant we use. Ferric sulfate is an acidic iron salt. Sedimentation after the coagulation takes place. We use quicklime as a pH and corrosion control. We disinfect with chlorine. We've actually started adding carbon dioxide as well. It's a rapid sand filtration plant, and we add fluoride. One of the points I wanted to make was that I've been there a while, and in that time I've seen a lot of changes. When I first started, water was regulated by the Public Health Agency. It was a federal agency that was under public health. And it had a manual of regulations that weren't very big or very thick at all. Ultimately, that changed with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We're now regulated by the EPA, and they in turn promulgate most of that through state health departments. And when I started, a lot of the regulatory things concerning water were basically looking at individual contaminants. They would put a maximum contaminant level on a contaminant, and you basically had to comply with that regulation. That changed over the years. Instead of identifying contaminants, they're still part of the equation, but they actually put rules into effect now that affect what you do, how you operate your treatment plant, what you need to do in operating the treatment plant in order to get rid of those contaminants. And these are a couple of examples of that. The surface water treatment rule came into effect not too long ago. Providence was always pretty proud of the fact that we had very low chlorine residuals in our water. People liked the taste, they felt it was good tasting. That somewhat changed with surface water treatment rule and a requirement within that rule for contact time. Contact time is basically a requirement that uses an equation to measure the amount of chlorine plus the amount of time it's in contact with the water before it gets to a customer, and there's some other factors such as temperature that get taken into consideration as well. In order to meet those contact time regulations, we had to increase the levels of chlorine that were in our system. Again, a regulatory issue that wasn't really identifying a contaminant. We had no bacteria problems, but we still had to meet that standard. Part of the reason was to help control protozoas such as Giardia and Cryptosporidium. At the same time, we had to change our location of our lime. We always put our lime up front of the treatment system. So we have a relatively unusual pH that we run in our system. It's up around 10. However, you don't get good coagulation up around 10. So our coagulation probably wasn't as efficient as it could be. With this regulation, we were forced, in order to achieve total organic carbon removal levels, we had to change that to get a more optimal pH for that coagulation. There's something called the lead and copper rule that came into effect. That probably goes back about 20 years now. Again, we always treated our water to a pH of 10. It was always quite effective. But when I started, the level that we had to meet for lead in drinking water was around 50 parts per million. Now it's around 15. It's actually an action level, and a certain percentage of your samples has to be below 15. So you can see that's quite a difference from 50 to 15. We met that level for a number of years after the rule was promulgated. However, we decided to make it better. And that was probably not a good idea in retrospect, because by making it better, a lot of the chemistry involved in this corrosion and lead corrosion and even iron corrosion in distributions, particularly older distributions such as Providence has, isn't all that well understood. So we incorporated consultants, we incorporated some experts from the EPA at the time, and they determined that based on some solubility curves, we could get better corrosion prevention with a pH slightly lower, around 9.7. What they didn't figure is there's a period of time where you have to transition from the types of material that's being formed on those pipes to something else that's less soluble. That transition time has really caused us fits over the last 5 to 6 years. We fell on the other side of the action level on the regulation. We've had to replace lead services. And that's part of the reason why we recently added carbon dioxide to our treatment process. Hopefully the carbon dioxide will help us to stabilize the pH, hopefully give us increase our carbonated alkalinity and just create a situation that works better with that solubility curve around 9.7 for a pH. Disinfection byproduct will address things like trihalomethanes. Those are chemicals that are formed in the disinfection products. You have precursors or contaminants in the water, which when chlorinated form things like trihalomethanes, haloacetic acids. What we did by increasing the chlorine with the contact time is we created a situation where we create more byproducts. And again, from the standard there is 80 parts per million. We started out around 15 to 20. When we made all our changes, we're pushing 50 and 60 now. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is that once you start addressing one problem, that in sometimes dominoes to something else, which in turn dominoes to something else. So it's kind of a juggling act, a balancing act right now that goes on. You need to comply with regulation, but then you need to consider a different regulation. That wasn't the way it was 50 or 60 years ago. At that time, you removed the contaminant and that was pretty much the end of the story. It's not the way it is today. One of the things that comes into play in all this is our filters. You might say that the filtration system in Scituate is pretty much the heart of the treatment there. If we were to lose our filters or lose the ability to effectively filter the water, it's somewhat like taking the heart out of that treatment system. Originally, when the plant was built in 1926, it was built with 10 filters. The plant capacity was 44 million gallons per day at that time. In the 1940s, we added 4 filters. That brought the capacity to 61. The reason back then for doing that was that the population was growing and there was a need to increase the capacity of the plant. We still felt there was growth in Rhode Island back in the early to mid 60s, so we increased the filter by another increased the filters by another 4 filters to bring it to its present 18 filter capacity right now. The 18 filters each can put out a maximum of 8 million gallons of water per day. That gives us 144 million gallon a day capacity of the plant, which makes it still the largest filtration plant in New England. It's not the largest supply in New England. The MWRA, Massachusetts Water Resources Authority in Massachusetts, is bigger. But they've got waivers, they don't necessarily need to filter their water, so they don't have a filtration plant this size. One of the problems is that whole filtration system, that last slide I put up shows the last filters being built around the 60s. It was actually the late 60s to early 70s. But those filter boxes and those filters really haven't been touched since then. They're rapid sand filters, just a single media sand. Underneath the sand, perforated cast iron laterals, which basically brings the water in and out of those filters. It's got an 8 million gallon a day capacity, as I mentioned. That capacity actually varies as well. Depending on the time of the year, we can alternate and vary that capacity to 5, 6, 7, or 8 million gallons a day. We like to keep as many filters in operation as possible. When I first started there years ago, one of the things I was told was you need to keep the water moving all the time. So we still operate basically with that philosophy. However, that whole filtration system is old, and it was in need of improvement. It's actually been in need of improvement now for probably 25 years. The average length of a filter, particularly the media in it, is probably not more than 20 years or so. After that time, you get the media itself, the sand itself starts getting rounded edges, and it just isn't as effective as a filter. We were well past that point. So it took us a while, but we finally gotten to the point where we were addressing it. We actually have about a $40 million project that's going on right now. It started about a year or so ago. It's expected to last for another 5 to 6 years. And it's a complete reconstruction of our filters. But it also ended up being a number of other things, and I'm going to detail that a little bit for you here. The old filters, again, were obsolete. They dated back to the 20s. The media dates back to the mid-60s. The filtration depth of those filters was a problem in itself. Rainwater and groundwater was actually infiltrating the filters, and I'll explain why that was happening. The filter surface was largely out of sight. There was under-drain clogging going on those cast iron laterals that I mentioned. And actually, there were 3 filter failures over the last few years. And again, there's 18 filters, so 3 filters reduces our capacity to some degree. More importantly, the fact that we had some failures indicated to us that there was a potential for other filters to continue failing as well. And again, once we were to lose those filters, we have a big problem. This is a little bit of a cross-section of a typical filter. It's got about 30 inches of sand in it, and then that's over about 18 inches of gravel. There's 3-inch diameter perforated cast iron pipes below that in the under-drain system. Again, this is a different look at that. 20% of that filter was visible, easily visible. The rest of that filter was basically under the ground, so we really couldn't see it. When you operate a treatment plant, there's a number of things that you do routinely with those filters to basically check and make sure they're operating the right way. One of those is when you backwash a filter, you really should have someone looking at the backwash itself. There's a number of clues that a backwash can give you in terms of whether it's functioning properly. You'll see mud balls forming, you'll see clogs, you'll see air bubbles, you'll see different things. We really couldn't see 80% of our filters all the time we were backwashing them. So if there was breakage or things allowing breakthrough of the filters below where we could see it, we weren't aware of it until it became a more severe problem. You can also see where what was underneath the ground, I should use that, shouldn't I? You can see what was underneath the ground kind of butted up to the building. This area here of the filter was underneath the ground. So there's drainage coming off the roofs, and there's rainwater or ground or surface water. All of that had the potential to infiltrate the filters themselves. That was also a problem for us. And we actually did a project probably about 15 or 20 years ago where we put an impermeable membrane over the pot that was underneath the ground. Quite frankly, it didn't last that long, and so we're still getting that infiltration. There's something that's done by the health department on a routine basis on water systems called a sanitary survey. And when they do those things, they kind of take a look at this type of problem, and they kind of note it and tell you need to fix it. We fixed it a couple of times now, but we still need to fix it again. Hopefully this next time will be the one that works. Let's look at the underdrains, those underdrain laterals that I mentioned to you. Those are perforated laterals, and basically water goes in and out, whether it's going through as the water's filtered or it's coming in the other direction as the water's being backwashed. They're corroding. It's not as bad as that. That color you see is primarily due to the ferric sulfate that's used. Again, it's an iron salt. But they are corroding and starting to be a problem. You can see the filter boxes themselves. You get exposed rebar in sections, fluorescence going on in the concrete and such. There's some cracks on the walls. That tile you see on the left-hand side there. That tile you see there is actually in the filter gallery itself. That's a tile wall that's literally cracking on the other side of the filters. Again, more cracks and different problems in the walls. There's some leaks going on in the filter boxes. And these are valves. These are the valves, the inlet valves and drain valves. They're leaking as well. You can see pretty significantly in some spots. So we started developing a strategy in order to implement this project. Originally it was just to look at the filter media and replace it, but as we kept looking at it, we realized we had much bigger problems than that. So it got expanded. We decided we wanted to look at not only replacing the media, but perhaps replacing it with something different, whether it's a dew media or a granulated activated carbon type filter. We looked at increasing the media depth because that affects what we could do as well and the efficiency of it. We wanted a new under-drain system, get rid of those cast iron laterals. We wanted to incorporate air scour into our backwashers, incorporate filter to waste into it. We needed those valves, those effluent valves, backwash valves, we needed those replaced. And then some waterproofing and some other metering needed to be done. The goal of the program was to enhance water quality and to replace an aging infrastructure. Water systems in general have a problem with aging infrastructures. Most people don't realize it, but it's there. The pipes underneath the roads that nobody really ever sees are not in the kind of condition that most people would appreciate if they really realized what was there. That's the filter gallery today, how it looks. We made modifications, or will be making modifications to the filter box, again, the media and the under-drain system. Again, the existing filters have 30 inches of sand and 18 inches of gravel supporting it. We wanted to look at the different types of media. In order to do that, we had to look at the troughs. The troughs in the filters are basically where water goes when we're backwashing it. The water flows to the top of those, into those troughs, and then the backwash water flows out. But those troughs were at a level that made doing other things problematic for us. There really wasn't enough depth to put different types of media in there, and there wasn't, because different media requires different depths, and there wasn't a I'll leave it at that. So we needed to raise those backwash troughs. That would make everything more effective. It would also give us the ability to put carbon in. One of the things that would help us to do that was also to change the under-drain system to a more modular type. That would increase the room we had between the troughs and the under-drain system, would increase the room we had for different media. I pretty much did. I'm getting a little ahead of the slides, I guess, yeah. But that would improve the effectiveness of the backwash and the effectiveness of what we needed to do. And again, for the GAC media. In order to evaluate some of the media considerations, we've actually run some pilots at the plant. We've created filter pilots. We've done this a number of times, actually. We've done it for different purposes. Most recently, we've done it for this reason, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the carbon. There's issues with the carbon. Our primary goal for the carbon is for disinfection byproduct removal and for taste and odors. There are times, particularly after we raised the chlorine, that people complained about taste and odors. Part of that was because they were used to a certain tasting water in the first place, but we always felt that there might be some underlying reason as well, but we could never identify it, so we thought the GAC may help us in controlling taste and odors. The problem with GAC, aside from the benefits of taste and odor removal and the disinfection byproducts, is it creates other situations. Again, that domino effect that I mentioned earlier. GAC is going to remove your chlorine. Once you remove the chlorine as it passes through the filters, now you've changed that contact time equation. So again, we're looking at a problem with our chlorine and how we put it in, how much we put in, what type of chlorine perhaps we utilize. So there may be considerations for different forms of chlorine to use. The other problem that's not on here would be manganese removal. The carbon type filters will not effectively remove manganese theoretically. We actually had someone from UMass look at that situation for us, and I think he made some astounding discoveries that it really wasn't affecting things the way they thought, and it was being effective. But we needed to look at it regardless. And it's still a consideration that that's in our minds. The under-drain system I referred to, those cast iron pipe laterals, they would be replaced with a modular system that looks something like that. That's stainless steel. I believe they made plastic too, but we wanted to go with something that would have lasted forever, such as stainless steel. Again, they would take care of those under-drains that are failing at the moment, create more effective backwashing. They could incorporate air scour right through the tubes of those modular systems. And theoretically could give us longer filter runs as well. The next thing we wanted to look at, in addition to the filters themselves, was the pipe gallery. The pipe gallery is kind of a tunnel world beneath the treatment plant that I don't believe even those of you who have taken tours have ever actually gotten a chance to see. but it exists downstairs, and it's basically where all the pipes end up. So it was a mess. It was difficult to get into, it was difficult to work in. There were leaking joints there, it was congested workspace, poor lighting, there's only one egress in and out of the place. It just had a myriad of problems. It's kind of hard to see. I'll show you some other slides here. You can see the pipes in that area they were not only deteriorating, but it was very congested. I remember in the old days, you used to have to literally crawl on the pipes to get to another area, and I can tell you how many times I banged my back on some of those pipes. The other problem was there was only one. That little stairway there is the only place you could get into this area, and it's a relatively long tunnel. That there is a wash water pipe, and you'll see that that's one of the major focuses of the improvements that will be made down there. This is the old arrangement. Again, that wash water pipe kind of runs right down the middle, and that had to do a lot with the congestion that occurred there. On this side, these pipes here are the effluent pipes coming from the filters, and on this side of this wall here is the clear well, which is basically a holding tank prior to our transmission system. We have a 78-inch aqueduct, which was actually put in the mid-70s as well, and a 90-inch, which was the original aqueduct that leave the plant from here. And that's basically, those two aqueducts supply everybody we supply. All the water comes out of those two pipes. The other thing that's over here is a lot of instrumentation. In this day and age, this whole treatment plant is run through a SCADA system. And so it's all computer controlled. And we have a full lab upstairs in the plant as well. However, we also have a lot of online meters, things for turbidity, pH, residual chlorine. There's all continuous monitors on those things, which also go back to the computer system. And most of that instrumentation originates in this room here. So again, it's stuff that needed maintenance and needed to be looked at. The proposed piping arrangement has that backwater wash water pipe going to the other side of that clear wall, the other side of the wall, which in effect clears a whole path up through the middle of that pipe gallery. You can see it's a lot different looking now than it did from some of those early photographs. You have that whole walkway, and this would be the instrumentation along the side wall here. So people can now work here, and they can also crawl underneath here without going through underneath that wash water pipe to get to the other side of those effluent valves. The lighting improved as well, more space to work. And on the opposite end of the room, which is really more of a long tunnel than it is a room, there's another entrance that was created so that people have two ways now in and out of this place. This was a confined space technically. A third thing that needed to be considered in this project was the roofing system. Again, about 80% of these filters are underneath the ground. That creates a number of problems that I mentioned already. Primarily the fact that we were getting that water that had the ability to get into the filters through the roofs. There's a better shot of the current situation. The filters are underneath this gravel. And again, there was a membrane that was put underneath the gravel that was supposed to help prevent the leaking from going on, but it really wasn't all that effective. That's the way the filter gallery again looks today. And that's how it's going to appear later. You can see there's now a roof that goes over the whole section of the filters. That underneath the ground part is going to be lifted off, and a roof and a whole, basically the whole filter gallery is going to be opened up so that 100% of the filters is above the surface and we can see the whole thing. It obviously makes for a much more modern looking plant as well. It really changes the whole look of the building, and I'll show you at the end here, it actually affects the way that the outside of the building looks as well. There's glass walls and the ability again to walk on either side of the filters. It's another view of it. You'll notice that curved window, you'll see that on the outside of the building as well. And that's the outside of the building. It creates a whole new building on the outside. They actually, my office is right over, right in this right in this section right here. And I had a window on the other side there. They just took that away from me. It's like I'm working in a tunnel now, as I'm in a cave. Okay, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to take a little bit different track here. I wanted to mention a little bit. I am president of New England Water Works this next year, so I wanted to mention it because of the audience I'm talking to. The New England Water Works was established in 1882. It's actually a section of the American Water Works Association, but it's actually as old as the American Association. New England Water Works was formed pretty much by the same people at the same time as American Water Works was founded. It's an authority on education, training opportunities, and public outreach. They do an awful lot of training, particularly for operators in water systems. Operators who work in a water system, who run that SCADA computerized system that we monitor plant operation with, they're all licensed operators. They all need to be certified, and they need continuing education. And New England Water Works provides quite a bit of that. We have a vision to inspire excellence in drinking water, public confidence in tap water, and water resource stewardship. We have some goals for this coming year, and I wanted to speak a little bit about that. One is to encourage and expand member participation. But one of the more important ones is that people who work in this and in this profession don't really, I'm really considered for the most part as environmentalists. Engineers in general aren't considered environmentalists. They like to build things. So environmentalists tend to think we're more the enemy than we are. But as you noticed in the beginning of this presentation, we spend a lot of time preserving the environment. That whole watershed protection program is really a very environmentally strong program. So one of the goals of this association this next year is to maybe find some bridges with people in the environmental community. Show them where there's commonality of our interests and where we have a lot of the same concerns. And we've actually had what we're calling a sustainability congress that we've done 2 years in a row now. Last year it was held at one of the buildings at MIT with a professor there who actually works and sets up scenarios for people to work together from different areas to kind of problem solve, to find a way to solve a problem that might be of interest to the two. So we've been doing some things like that, which I believe is pretty important. The other thing that is one of our goals for this year is to make the public aware of what we do. I was reading recently an excerpt from a book that was written, and one of the things that was focused on in the book was the fact that most people don't know where their water comes from. They're relatively ignorant concerning water supply and how it gets to them. It's understandable in a lot of ways because, as I mentioned earlier, the pipes are underneath the ground. Treatment plants are most of the time in a remote site where people don't necessarily see them. And it's pretty consistently coming out of their water. It's pretty reliable. So people take it for granted. But that becomes a problem. The fact that most of the people who work in water supply think it's good to be a silent servant and somehow that recognition is going to come automatically doesn't necessarily happen. And in some ways it works to their detriment. I don't think people understand the infrastructure needs that are out there. I don't think they see the opportunities that are out there for economic development and getting this economy going in the right direction. There's plenty of infrastructure projects out there that could be funded that would benefit the engineering community and manufacturers and such. And the other thing is to make students like you aware of the profession. It's kind of a joke amongst us that most of us started out from school thinking we'd be working somewhere else, and half of us got there by accident, and we found ourselves working in the water business all of a sudden. We'd like to get it so that people know we're there before they get out of school, and they actually think that we're a legitimate reason to start a career. To that end, we're also trying to increase value of our membership, and again, the people who belong to this particular association have a lot of experience in this field, a lot of knowledge, a lot of technical knowledge, and we want to make that available to the general public, and actually not just to the general public, but to people who are developing new technology, people who are developing new regulations. One of the things I want to make you realize is the opportunities that exist with research in this field. The American Water Works also has a secondary association called the Research Foundation. And I'm really not sure if any of the professors have taken advantage of it here, but there are bids put out for research projects that professors and graduate students can apply for and get funding for and participate in that research. That some of it's very technical nature of water supply. And actually, New England Water Works this past year has been considering starting what we're calling a New England Foundation, which would also be a funding source for colleges and such, and for research projects that we felt would contribute to water in technology. In order to do that, we've actually created a new membership for students. There's actually two other associations besides the New England Water Works Association. One is the New England Water Environment Association, which is primarily a wastewater association, and the other is the New England chapter of the American Public Works Association. We work with those two other associations, and we offer students a membership in all three for $30. And again, in the hope that you see the opportunities in water, and again, even some of the other opportunities in terms of research and graduate work. We actually offer scholarships as well that students can apply for. And quite frankly, the last few years, all of those scholarships have either gone to Massachusetts and I believe other states in New England. I can't think of one from Rhode Island over the last few years, so I wanted to make sure people were aware that those kind of things are out there. And that's it. I'll answer any questions if you have them.
What are some of the, would you say, are the important issues in water in Rhode Island, let's say this year or the coming years?
I think the most important issue is that allocation situation. Again, that has the ability to limit supplies and the amount of water that the utilities for drinking water is entitled to. In terms of Providence is concerned, that tends, in my mind, goes hand in hand somewhat with the fact that we're a sole source. Projects like Big River and such haven't really been initiated in the past for various reasons, but I think Rhode Island is very susceptible to a big problem if something would happen to that sole source supply. So I think those things in combination with each other are probably the biggest issues. We have a lot of water in Rhode Island, and quite frankly, it should be, in a state that's looking for reasons why they need economic stimulus, water is one of the biggest selling points, and I think we should use it. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Question right here.
Thank you,
I
Jim.
think I saw in one of your slides that Situate itself doesn't receive water from the Situate Reservoir.
No.
Was I reading the graph correctly?
They're entitled to receive water from the if they want to get water from the Situate Reservoir, it's more of a transmission problem. They're going to have to build some pumping stations. And they need themselves to fund those pumping stations and to get them built. Again, they would be a wholesaler to us at that point. And so they're entitled to our water, they can have it, but they need to get the transmission figured out.
So what is their current source of water?
Mostly groundwater wells, individual wells. Yeah.
How much per mile does it cost to lay pipe for?
That I can't tell you.
You have no idea?
I don't do that, no.
It's $1 million a mile for methane.
Yeah. I can't even throw a number out at you. I don't know.
And any chance for Big River to sprout?
I think, personally, I think there's always a chance. I don't think there's a desire for it to first of all, when it was originally proposed, believe it or not, it was proposed back when I first started working there. And the gentleman I worked for at the time wasn't close to retirement at that point, and we were so close that the engineering firm that was working on the design actually sat down with us and wanted to know where we wanted offices. And this gentleman said to me, he goes, well, you know what, I'll stay with this plant, and you go to the other plant, and we'll work together. It never happened, obviously. There's actually those two transmission lines that leave the plant. One is a 90-inch, that was the original. That 78-inch actually has a connection down the road, and that 78-inch turns into a 102-inch pipe. That transition was because that was where Big River was supposed to tie in. That still exists. So we were all set and ready to go. It didn't go. Now, from what my understanding, I'm not really involved much in what's going on right now. My understanding is the county is or the state probably is developing wells on that site. But those wells will give only a fraction of the amount of water that Big River was intended to be able to deliver initially. So it's a money thing. I mean, the cost is just gone, it's about God knows how many times over it's from the original cost.
Okay, last question? Okay, let's thank our speaker again.